Hello and welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast. My name is Adrian Reynolds, Head of National Ministries for the FIEC. And I'm here today with John Stevens, our National Director. Hello, John.
Hi, Adrian.
And I'm here with Justin Gill. Hello, Justin.
Hello, Adrian.
Phil is away on holiday, so we've got the super sub in. We love him, Justin. And we're here to talk about the news, our kind of regular roundup, really, of the news. So thank you guys for joining us as we think about things that are happening in the news. And the first thing to say at the outset is we want to mark the sad death, really, of Jeremy Marshall, good friend to FIEC and also to many FIEC churches. John, you and I knew him reasonably well. And we're very sad to hear, so we're recording this on a Friday, we're very sad to hear that last Sunday he eventually succumbed to the cancer that's he's been being treated for I think about 7 years. Yep. And really, in those 7 years, and actually over the whole of his life, he's not a lot older than you and I, John, just a remarkable life lived for Jesus, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Jeremy grew up in a kind of in Hemel Hempstead in a congregational church where his dad, John Marshall, was the kind of pastor, a key figure in the development of Banner of Truth, a sort of reformed ministry. He then went on to have a career in banking, became kind of CEO of Hawes Bank in London, which was a bit like going into the bank in Mary Poppins when you went there. It was kind of
it was a very strange experience, bank. Sort of lined corridors and
very, very successful career. I first got to know him when I became National Director of FIEC, and actually he was a wonderfully helpful and gracious supporter of the cause of the gospel. He connected with a wide variety of different groups of Christians, so he had a real understanding of kind of nonconformity, but he'd also been in Anglican churches. He was generously supportive of the gospel in a wide variety of contexts, financially, but also in terms of the advice that he gave. So sort of myself personally, when I became National Director, he was helpful in giving some help in terms of thinking about how you lead, what the responsibilities are in that role. He's supported a number of FIEC churches in their work, which has been kind of great. He's been really helpful in us thinking through particularly training, because he was very much involved in London Seminary and taking that work forward. He's been significantly involved in London City Mission. So a number of Christian organisations have benefited hugely.
Christianity Explored as well.
Christianity Explored. And then actually recently Passion for Life, I'm a trustee of Passion for Life. He was instrumental in the 2020 kind of vision and mission and helped drive that. And I think what was so remarkable is, I mean, it was obviously a great shock when he was diagnosed relatively young with cancer, but actually the Lord used that in a most remarkable way. And I think Jeremy would say himself that in many ways that was one of the most fruitful periods of his life. And he became a wonderful evangelist, sharing the hope of Christ in the face of kind of cancer. Numerous churches he spoke at where he spoke about his story of cancer and his hope in Christ. And obviously that connects with a huge number of people who are sort of facing suffering and illness. So something that from a human perspective you might think was devastating, perhaps people would naturally say, has God in some way let somebody down there who's faithfully served him for years? In actual fact, the Lord used that in a remarkable way. And Jeremy recognised that. And in some ways it's not unlike Joni, who kind of had that terrible accident and then was remarkably used. So Jeremy has been remarkably used and blessed, and many people have come to know Christ as a result of that.
Well, there's a little tribute on our website written by Ken Brownell, who knew him very well, has known him for many, many years, a part of the same church together. And of course, we're remembering Jeanette and Naomi and Nat and Sam in their grief. But we're very thankful to God for the life of Jeremy Marshall. Now, I feel like sitting around the table, I've got two kindred spirits. We can talk about cricket. I realise that the Women's World Cup is on. We're going to come to the Women's World Cup. But cricket has been and gone. And I think it's just safe to acknowledge that we lost the Ashes. Enough said. But one of the things that was in
morally, we won it.
So we had a moral victory. Oh, so much to explore there, John. So much to explore. But we lost the little urn. And one of the things that interested me right at the end was that the commentary team, the BBC commentary team on the BBC Sport website, were asked to name their all-time Test 11. And obviously it was very much focused on players they'd actually seen rather than just heard about. So I don't think W.G. Grace featured very much. But in every commentator's team was Imran Khan. Pakistani, I guess all-rounder, really, but exceptional bowler, captain, led the Pakistani team to the World Cup, and really one of the finest, I think, Pakistani cricketers ever to live.
Yeah.
Is that how his seen something. Just tell me about what's happened on Independence Day in Pakistan, Justin.
Yeah. So I'm quite surprised to know what, especially the connection to Ashes and what people said that about Imran Khan. He's one of the most celebrated cricketer in Pakistani history. So again, he became a cricketer with a bit of playboy.
Yeah, international playboy, married into the Goldsmith family.
And it's all that. And plus then becoming a very popular politician.
Yep.
And very much celebrated in Pakistan. And he's basically organized his political party with his background of 25 years of struggle and all that. And then his humanitarian work, and he's well known for that, you know, the cancer research and cancer hospitals in Pakistan. So he's very much got that identity as well. So I think, but what happened recently is that on the 14th of August, when Pakistan celebrates its independence, and what did the PCB, Pakistan Cricket Board, came up with a short documentary highlighting the achievements of Pakistani cricket and cricketers over the last 50 years.
Okay, so the highlights of Pakistani cricket over the last 50 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
I think I can see where this is going, but carry on.
So the highlight was obviously 1992 World Cup final, England against Pakistan.
Yeah.
So we know that who won it, but that was the highlight of Pakistani cricket. But Imran Khan was the captain, but this time he was completely taken out of the documentary. There was no picture of Imran Khan.
So he's been airbrushed from Pakistani cricket history.
History, exactly. Deliberately because of the political reason, because Imran Khan is behind the bars.
Okay, so some people will have seen this on the news, and obviously we don't want this to be just about this issue, but we want to give some background. So why is Imran Khan behind bars, in brief?
Right. In brief, he was taken out of the power about a year and a half ago. There's a whole lot of background to it. There's a theory that there's American conspiracy, and I don't want to go into the conspiracy theories as well. But overall, if you see that what Pakistanis like to call the military establishment, Pakistan has never been truly a democracy. It's always been in the background, military trying to control its politically elected politicians. Yeah. So currently, Imran Khan is paying the price, so standing up against that. And again, he's in doing that. The one thing is really fascinating, and I think that kind of a poll, the BBC poll, also plays into it. Because it's somebody who's known as a cricketer, comes out and become a politician and takes a stand against a dictatorship or authoritarian government. And that's why I think people do admire him now more than ever before. Even he may not come back into power, but what he's now done
and that's true in Pakistan as well. People in Pakistan would admire him. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He's the most popular politician as we speak now in the history of Pakistan.
Right.
Or he's the most popular leader, I would say.
Just not with the military.
Not with the military. That's where the current regime, or call it the current government, the caretaker government, is trying to shut down any voices, any pictures in the history to basically take him out of that.
So that's what's going on with the cricket.
That's what we're going on. But again, what had recently happened just yesterday, again, there was a big hoo-ha in the international media. The cricketers around the world were like, how can you do that? Just how can you raise a personality out of from your history? So what they've done is they've issued a new version of that small documentary.
Is he in that?
He's in that for 92 World Cup. But there's another cricketer which you probably know. He was a fast bowler, Wasim Akram.
Yeah.
Right. The reason is he basically did his objection on Twitter to say that how can you do that to basically Imran Khan was Wasim Akram's mentor. So he was really offended with that. So he raised his voice about it. Now they have taken Wasim Akram out of that and they enter something. So you can see the whole political thing in that. But it's quite fascinating that how at the international level other players admire Imran Khan. Yeah. But within the Pakistani context, there's every effort to take him out just because of the political reason.
So it's very volatile at the moment.
It is.
Very unstable. Is that impacting Christians? So we know there are, Christians are a minority in Pakistan, and a small minority now. You obviously grew up in that sort of Christian world in Pakistan. Is it harder now for Christians in that environment? How is it changing, or is it just the same? What's the situation on the ground for Christians?
Right. So people might have heard that in last 3 days, there have been some churches in Jaranwala near Faisalabad. It's a very industrial part of Pakistan. And again,
north, south, centre, just
it's very mid of Pakistan. So
okay.
Pakistan's quite long and narrow in way. Yeah. So it's very mid, and it's Punjab province, which is the most prosperous economically. So that's where it has happened. Jaranwala is a small district near Faisalabad, and there are Pakistani Christian colonies or populations. And in a way that the Pakistani Christians quite often live is in their own established colonies, and their colonies, its center point is the church building or the church. So that's where one of the Catholic church in that small population pocket, there was an accusation that somebody has done blasphemous material or printed something against Islam, and some of the mosques and the mosque leaders starting encouraging their congregation to get out and basically punish these people, and basically people got aggressive and started burning down the churches. So it led from one church to the other churches. What I know from unofficial, my friend resources, is around about 20 plus churches have been burned down.
Okay.
But because the mainstream media was trying to cut this down, like not to portray on it, and they were basically in the beginning, they were not reporting at all. But from social media pressure and all that, now they started doing it. Even BBC Urdu was a bit hesitant at that point. So now we know that officially there are about 4 or 5 churches, but unofficially there are about 20 plus churches. So from various denominations and independent churches as well.
Okay.
But the history goes back to the blasphemy law from 1978, which basically the history basically goes back to the colonial time when Britain, as the colonial power, introduced these blasphemy laws to basically manage different ethnic, religious groups. Right. But obviously, India and Pakistan carried on and having that legislation, and basically changed it according to that. So it's used quite often as a yardstick against the religious minority.
Right.
And Pakistani Christians quite often basically feel the force of it.
So actually what's happening in the political realm always cascades down to Christians because of the nature of the laws and the country.
Yeah, overall, as Pakistanis, Christian Muslims, or any other religious group, the trust in the justice system is at its lowest level.
Right. So you've got to come in both ways. You've got laws and political corruption, and it's not a democracy, you say. But actually, when things do go wrong, there's no confidence. Actually, the justice system is going to resolve it.
That's why the mob justice mentality.
Yeah.
I think it is quite in a way that it happens in Pakistan, because people know that if it goes to the courts, it's not going to happen and stuff. Although, there is legislation that works both ways, and there's been in the history, Muslims have been killed, accused of blasphemy, just for a political or vengeance for various reasons. But saying that, it's overall the country's economic issues, the justice not been delivered. People don't get the sense that they've been given the justice, and not having the trust in the authorities.
Yeah, okay. Now, John, I want to explore this a little bit more from a point of view of Christians in this country. Obviously, we've got a large Pakistani heritage population in the UK, and that's one issue perhaps to explore. But I'm especially thinking of Hebrews. I see you've got your Bible open. We were just talking about this earlier. Hebrews chapter 13. Really the command to Christians to remember those who are in prison as though we were there with them. Yeah. I have to confess, I find that quite hard. It's quite an abstract idea. So, a prayer meeting for essentially persecuted Christians. Okay, I've got my head around that. I think that's a really good thing to do. We do that in our church. What does this actually mean, though, to identify with someone in this way? Is it just what's the power? What's going on in Hebrews 13? Because I think actually, as British church leaders from all different kinds of backgrounds in our churches. This is what we're called to do. How on earth do we do it? Hearing what we've just heard.
Well, I don't think you didn't know this when we were talking about how we were going to do this, but I've been working through Hebrews for the past couple of months, and I happen to be in Hebrews 13 earlier this week, so I've given a little bit of thought to that.
Oh, well.
I mean, a number of things. I think this idea of remember those who are in prison, biblically, remembering is not just a mental activity. I think we have to grasp that again. Whenever the Bible says remember, or it calls on God to remember, it's not raising an issue of he's forgotten or you've forgotten. It's not a purely intellectual bring them to mind. The call to remember is actually a call to act. So remembering means you do things.
Right.
So actually remembering is not purely a mental thing. It's a call to action. So we talk about empathy, but it's really saying take action. So this idea of remember those who are in prison as if you were with them. In the ancient world, prison was a place where you either...
It's not just spare a thought for them.
No.
Put the picture on the fridge so that every time you make a cup of tea, they're in your mind.
Absolutely, because in the ancient world, prison was where you were held either awaiting trial or awaiting execution. So prison was not a punishment. And in prison, you weren't provided with a state system that provides you with food and all of those kinds of things. The way you survive in prison is your family provide for you.
Right.
We actually see that in the book of Acts. When Paul is in prison in various places, we're told that the local Christians came and met his needs. So you have to think, here are Christians from the community that the author is writing to who are in prison. And basically, the author is saying to the church community, meet their needs, remember them. So it's far more than empathize with them. And actually, the challenge for the readers of Hebrews is doing that basically requires you've got to come above the parapet and show that you're part of their community.
So you don't just can't just hide away and think about people. No.
And you may well bring persecution on yourself, because if you are turning up at the prison, giving food, clothing, caring for these others, you're acknowledging them as brothers and sisters in the new community
Hence,
of the church.
as if you were there with them. That's an identification.
And actually, it's actually a call to be willing to risk persecution and suffering in order to stand with them and kind of meet their needs. So I think it's worth recognizing that's what it is. That's not to say we shouldn't be praying for those who are being persecuted or feeling emotionally for their suffering, but it's about talking about much more than that. I think the challenge for us as Christians is how do we do that with a worldwide church where today we know far more of what is happening, but people in many ways are far more distant from us. So, for example, here in Hebrews, this is about people in your community. It's people in your church that you have an immediate responsibility for. I think one of the burdens we feel as Christians is because we now have so much communication, because almost anything can be brought to our attention, there is this expectation we've got to do something about it. We've got to care about it. And it's actually navigating this really difficult balance that we do have a responsibility, but not everybody is our responsibility. And actually, I think as Christians, navigating that is really hard, that actually we want to care, but sometimes I think we can be made to almost act as if we're God with omniscience and all power, and we're responsible for everybody. So we have to recognize we have an immediate responsibility to those that are closest to us, for whom we have kind of a concern, those in our immediate Christian communities. That's where it cashes out, first of all. I don't think we can care for and pray for absolutely everybody in the worldwide church in a way that meaningfully engages with them in that sense. And actually, we need to recognize our human limitedness. I don't think God calls us to do that. So it's right and proper that there are organized ways of caring for Christians. So in the Bible, again, we see the Acts, 1 Corinthians, collections being organized that we can participate in. Now, that's a slightly lesser way of helping than turning up at prison and taking food and taking clothing. It's a way of helping others to do that.
Is there something in between those two? So what if you've got connections in a church? Make something of those, right?
Indeed.
So we're in a church with you, Justin, which is great joy and delight. So we've got connections with Pakistan.
Absolutely.
That we haven't got, say, with another country, Myanmar. Let's just take a country just random. So actually, we believe in providence, don't we? So in those circumstances, we should be making something of those connections, shouldn't we?
Absolutely. And as a church, when there were the floods in Pakistan, that's exactly what we did. We gathered money and we sent Justin to those churches and that context to be able to bring that to them. And I think it's this we need to recognize we are limited, and therefore we have to ask the question, what is my calling and what are my particular responsibilities? We can't meet the needs of everyone fully all the time. And I think so many Christians live under a burden of guilt because this is all brought to their attention and they feel I ought to do something about it. I ought to care about it. I ought to provide for those needs. And basically, emotionally, we're not able to do that.
No.
So how you navigate my responsibility, my calling, my particular connections, but having a wider concern as well is hugely important. And I think actually we need to see the church as an extended family. We so often narrow it down into the kind of the nuclear family, which is very intense and very close. The important point is that in the family of God as a whole, everybody is taken care of. That doesn't mean that every individual is responsible to every individual. We've all got our place to play. And all of us have different primary responsibilities. The key thing is that the body as a whole does its work. So I think we've just got to navigate that. So absolutely, practical action, not just empathy. And I think we live in a world in which we are very quick to empathize and want to say, I feel your pain, to like on Facebook. And actually, that's not what's being talked about biblically.
That. Yeah, that's really helpful, John. Thank you.
Something that, really now just struck me that, talking about Jeremy Marshall and him during his suffering, making everything to make sure that Jesus' name is glorified through his suffering. And same as like looking at these Christians and just trying to help them and praying for them so that the Jesus is glorified through their suffering. These are two common themes in these both events. And just to say that, because of the populations who live in around the churches, the Christian population, they had to flee their houses as well. So their houses have been burned down alongside the church buildings. But again, praying is quite important. And at the same time, what in my personal capacity, what I'm doing is that helping some of the churches, the evangelical churches, how to equip their leaders to basically answer the questions of their Muslim neighbors or Muslim community that they live and work among. And especially training the young people, the young evangelists there, to basically answer these questions and face these questions very non-confrontational way, and to avoid these sort of situations. So I think these are very important things to pray for.
And I'll tell you what, if you call the office and talk to Justin about that, he'd love to talk to you about it. Yes.
A couple of observations. I think in lots of our churches, we've got people from different ethnicities. And actually those are, where we've got people in our congregation who are connected, that gives us greater responsibility. So I was thinking about a church that was Rwandan and Burundians that is part of FIEC. We discovered that their families were being persecuted, killed back home. Again, we suddenly have a responsibility there because of that personal connection. So, and it may well be there aren't many people from a different background in your church, but there are other local churches of people from different kind of nationalities and backgrounds. Build links with them and then have
what about even, I was in a church in a largely Bengali area, or actually a Sylheti area of London, which is an area of Bengal, of Bangladesh. And there were no Sylheti Christians, very few Sylheti Christians anywhere in the world. So there were no Sylhetis in the church or in any other church locally. But what a witness, actually, to locals to be supporting the few Sylhetis that there are back in Sylhet. So you say, well, actually, God has put us in this place, and it's where we are.
I just think, reflecting on Justin's comments, I think it's also important that we recognise it's humbling to know what other brothers and sisters are experiencing. And as we look at our situation, we are remarkably privileged to have relative peace, to have an uncorrupt government, a justice system that works basically fairly and impartially. And I think Christians in this country can speak of themselves as if they're somehow being persecuted and mistreated. And frankly, we catastrophize a situation in which in world terms and historical terms, we enjoy some of the greatest freedom and peace that believers have ever enjoyed.
That's right.
And I think we just need to totally change the way we think about our situation and be grateful for so much of what we enjoy that the vast majority of the world doesn't.
Good. We've been very thorough. It's a really important subject, though. So we're on the plane going to Pakistan. We've journeyed 9 hours. I don't know, 8 hours, 9 hours to Pakistan. Let's go the whole hog and make it to Australia and New Zealand. Because at the moment in Australia and New Zealand, there is an extraordinary thing happening, which is the Women's World Cup of football. And no doubt, John, you've been glued to the screen. I know you love football, and now the Ashes is over. England had a chance to beat the Australians, which they did in the semi. Did you watch the semi-final?
I didn't.
I had the semi-final on in the office, just in the corner, and Joel, who's producing today, will testify that there were big shouts from my office when the goals went in. I got very excited about it. I think, I have to be honest, for the first time, I've really got excited about women's football. So England are in the final. finals on a Sunday. We could talk about whether you should cancel church on a Sunday, but we're all in a church that meets at 3 p.m. So frankly, we're not interested in that.
Remind us who's playing in the final, England playing against?
England against Spain.
Right, and I'm flying out to Spain on Saturday.
Are you?
That's going to be something to watch.
Well, it's interesting because in the past, I guess, 10 years ago, a women's football tournament certainly wouldn't have been on mainstream TV, I don't think. It certainly wouldn't have been, front page headlines in the press. So women's sport in general, the women's Ashes, if you want to go to cricket, went on at the same time as the men's Ashes this year and got a lot of coverage and national coverage and TV coverage. So women's sport in general has been elevated to this extraordinary level. Should we be rejoicing in that? John, we must rejoice in that. I'm really enjoying it.
And actually, it's overcoming of a whole load of cultural issues about sport and women in sport. I mean, I remember at school, what men played, what women played were very different. So it's not that there hasn't been women's sport, but it was confined to
women played football until 1920 when they were banned by the FA.
Absolutely. And then it becomes seen as this is a male kind of thing. And I think it's absolutely right that there has been a transformation of that.
We should be rejoicing in that.
Participating, the quality and the skill is constantly improving. And actually, I think in the dynamics at the moment, it is all about, here is a women's football team. And it's always been a sort of, want of a word, a Cinderella that kind of hasn't had the attention. People aren't paid. It's not regarded in the same way. And there is clearly both an active promotion of wanting to put women's football on the same level, and indeed a national mood of really getting behind it.
All good things.
And supporting it, seeing the skill of the manager. I mean, the manager of the England women's football team is now being talked of as a potential successor to Gareth Southgate.
Yeah, Serena Wiegman. She gets my vote. I think she's great. Yeah.
So actually, kind of women's skill in this activity, which is in a sense parallel to the men's activity, is now being honoured and recognised. And I think that's a kind of a really important kind of step sort of forwards. And it seems to me that there are parallels there with the whole of culture and parallels in church ministry as well.
Really? That seems like a bit of a stretch, John.
Well, yeah, I mean, you might think I'm a complementarian. You maybe think I wouldn't think that. But actually, I do think that kind of in many churches, there's been a recognition over the last 50 years of the value of women's ministry in a whole variety of areas. Women are able to teach the Bible. Women are able to do evangelism. Women are able to serve in all sorts of ways in which men in churches can also serve. And in the past, women have not been able to do some of those things. It's not been valued. It's not been appreciated. It's almost been like the FA banning people from sort of doing things. I think it's absolutely right that we recognise the equality of value of the way that women can minister in churches. I'm delighted that more and more of them are doing that.
Doesn't the parallel break down? If you push that, you would say, well, then everything that men can do, women can do, and vice versa. Doesn't that parallel break down at that point?
Well, you might think that, but nobody would suggest that we abolish men's and women's football and we basically create a single kind of form of football in which actually you simply play. If you did that at the highest level, that would in the end break down the valuing of both. And I think actually in a way that also reflects on the Bible's teaching about complementarianism, that complementarianism recognises equality but difference and wants both to be able to flourish. And in large measure, that is often in very parallel activities. So I think even at the level of wanting to raise women's football to a level in which it is just as valued and honoured as what's happening in the men's game, there are actually some quite strong parallels there. That distinction is not eliminated, but there is genuinely a recognition of equal value and honouring. And for those of us who are in complementarian churches, I think that the challenge is much more to value and appreciate women's ministry fully, because that hasn't been done in the past. And in the end, it undermines the complementarian position if it is used as a way of suppressing the ministry of women or valuing them. And actually, what's really interesting about this is men appreciating women's football and becoming supporters and encouragers of that. And that's the key thing that needs to change in lots of churches, is men in complementarian churches valuing, supporting, enthusing about women's ministry. And I think that cuts at the level of training women appropriately, being willing to provide funding for that. I think for women working in churches, and more of our churches now have women's workers, the whole issue of equal pay and kind of structures for senior women's ministry in our churches, again, I think that's often neglected. Those are parallel to the questions of how women footballers and managers are supported, and we've got to grapple with that.
Great. I will, if you'll forgive me, not be thinking about those on Sunday when I watch the match, but that's really helpful. Prediction for the score? So Spain, you're going to be in Spain.
I'm going to be in Spain and with my Spanish friends, and it will be really difficult to show sport for England.
Come on, prediction. Come on.
I think 2-1.
2-1
to England.
John?
I've got no idea. It would be the equivalent of asking the octopus in my case to decide.
But we do
win.
Ask the octopus.
No,
the octopus does a great job. Okay, I'm going for 4-0 England. Okay, Spain got hammered by Japan in the early rounds. I'm going for 4-0 England.
But they made it to the final.
Come on, they scraped through into the final. So come on, England. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks, Justin, for joining us. I think your insights on Pakistan, Justin, will be just extremely helpful. Thank you so much. And thank you, John, as always, for joining us. This has been Independence, the FIEC podcast. You've been with us just rounding up the news. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please do rate and review. You can subscribe as well. And we look forward to catching up with you soon.